Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in maybe about 3 minutes or so, but maybe you could just help me with a sound check, make sure you can hear me okay. And just somebody can put into the chat if my voice is coming through. And then the other thing, I put a document in the chat there, and I want to make sure that you can open that. So if you would check. Great. Good, and how about the document? Able to open the document up? Great. So depending how you like to do the course, you might want to have that document open up on your computer so that you can use some of the information as I draw on it. And for those who don't know the refuges that we chant at the beginning of our Buddhist Studies classes, you can get that ready. That's at the very end of the document. And like I mentioned, we'll get started in about a minute or two. Got a message that the internet was unstable, so I just want to make sure that you can still hear me okay. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing. Maybe I'll get my phone. Okay, so I've connected with my cell phone, and let's see if the internet is better there. So testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. Good, so hopefully this will be steady for us tonight. Good. Thanks for that feedback, everybody. So I want to give a big welcome to everyone. And please forgive us for these worlds we live in with Zoom and live stream for tonight. And it's really important that we make it work as best we can. And that means, like with the live stream, you don't get to see the community, so you have to use your imagination. And it's really, it's one of the most central teachings in the Dharma and the Buddhist teachings is that it really matters what we pay attention to and how we pay attention to whatever we're paying attention. So you could pay attention to all the deficiencies with our technology, and that would lead, of course, to very frustrating experience. Or you could pay attention to what really works or works well enough. A little bit distracted by the chat. Just want to make sure that there are actually people out there. And at the beginning of a Buddhist Studies class, we often take a little time just to connect as a community. This work that we're going to do together, we're basically taking the pointing out instructions from the Buddha, and we're using the mind to get to know the mind, to really move beyond a superficial, and even though it's a little blunt to say it this way, an ignorant way of understanding our life, understanding our mind, and really developing our own direct and immediate experience and understanding that comes from that, paying attention to our own mind, using the mind to know the mind. So I just want to greet everybody. I know there's probably some people here in the Buddhist Studies class for the first time, so a big welcome to you. And starting next week, you'll have an in-person option, and hopefully we'll have our internet figured out by then so that we have a good quality, and the live stream will be not having gaps. And I want to thank Kevin, who will be our program host starting next week for the in-person people, and Scott Jensen, who will be helping with technology, and Dave Braun, who will help us create the Zoom groups for those of you online. And of course, Gabe Keller-Flores, our esteemed office manager, one of Common Ground's teachers, who is really, this last year with the pandemic and so much else, has really helped us survive as a community. So just a few nuts and bolts. Most of you know, but if you're new, you might not. This is a 6-year curriculum, but it's really okay for people to come and go. And if you're like me and most of us, it's not enough to do the curriculum one time, maybe many, many lifetimes of cycling through these instructions from the Buddha or any wise person, the sort of lineage of wise human beings that have been doing their best to share what they've come to know about their own heart, and that gets passed down one generation after another, and we're the recipients. And now it's our turn to learn as best we can. And they're like overlapping maps, these different things we study through the 6 years. Usually there are 4 courses a year, anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks long. And we're just taking the different instructions the Buddha gave during those many years that he taught, 45 years or so that he taught in northern India about 2,600 years ago. And so the map we're working with this summer is really the continuation of the teachings on satipatthana, the foundations or the establishments of mindfulness. So this summer is mindfulness of the mind. In the spring, we did mindfulness of feeling tone. And in the winter, we did mindfulness of body. And those talks and discussions are online at our YouTube channel and on dharmaseed.org. So you can listen if you want to go back and pick up. And yes, this is getting recorded and it will stay up on our YouTube channel for you to listen to anytime. And I'm also recording the audio that will be on our dharmaseed.org website. You can access that through the Common Ground website, or just go to dharmaseed.org directly and search for me, and you'll find the Buddhist Studies audio there. And really, to the heart of what we do with these Buddhist Studies classes is it's really for people who have an ongoing practice, including having done some retreat practice, at least some half-day or day-long retreats, and a real commitment to practice most days, if not every day. And then what we're doing is we're working together, we're studying, we're taking the information, and we're reflecting on this new information that we're getting. And then as we contemplate this information, it allows us to see what we're not seeing about the nature of experience, the nature of the mind, and insight deepens. Understanding is transformed, We become a wiser and kinder human being. And so the Buddha talks about these three aspects of wisdom. We need, it is a kind of wisdom to seek out information, pointing out instructions, words from those who are wiser than we are, like the Buddha, and then to learn that, hear that information and learn it, or even memorize it, so we can, in a sense, regurgitate it. And then we can contemplate it and see what is this information, like in this case, for this course, the teachings on mindfulness of the mind, how does it actually help to illuminate our experience? How does it help us to see about the nature of the mind that we haven't seen before? And then to be grateful, to really recognize those little and sometimes big shifts in understanding. It isn't that our thinking mind figures out something. It's that we're using the teaching to get close, to be intimate, to see things as they are. And at some point, that exposure to Dhamma, the way it is, there's enough exposure that it shifts the mind's understanding. And we call that insight. And in that sense, insight is always surprising. It's not like, oh, I'm about to have an insight, and then we have an insight. We're just chugging along, using the teachings to be present with the way it is, in this case, in particular, aware of the nature of the mind, the quality of the mind. And with enough moments, enough momentum, enough continuity, then the understanding of the mind shifts. So just keep in mind about that study, practice, contemplating, insight. And part of the study and reflection is that every other week we have small groups. And I know this isn't comfortable for some of you, but it's really not meant to be an optional part of the Buddhist Studies classes. So next week, those of you online, with Dave's help, you'll be in small Zoom groups of 3, sometimes 4 people. Those of you who are in the building, I will divide you up into small groups. So the last 20 minutes or so, we'll have small group meetings. And just to give you a little bit of heads up, you have a whole week to do some of the study that you will find. There are many options for what you might pick up and study and read in that link that I put in the chat. And you can make a copy of that link so you have access to it. But of course, it will be on our YouTube channel. So you can always find it there. And what you might share, and we'll talk about tonight, is just the first and foremost, the most interesting thing to share is just like, what is it like to pay attention to the mind? What is it like to use the mind to pay attention to the mind? So in just a moment, we'll do a guided meditation and we'll get a chance to see directly, like, what is my capacity to be aware of the mind? Do I even know what the mind is? So it's not, of course, thinking about what we think the mind is, right? There are volumes written, philosophical volumes written, people thinking about what the mind is. But if the mind is something, then it's something that can be known here and now. So what is it to know the mind here and now? So that's a lot of what we'll be doing these next 6 weeks, is using some instructions from the Buddha to get better at being aware of the mind here and now as a present moment phenomena. But before we do that, we'll do what we normally do at the beginning of our Buddhist Studies classes, is we chant the refuges, and we chant them slowly. So not so much in the traditional pace, but in a little bit of a slower pace. And when we are in person, it's really nice to sing together. All of you hopefully will join me, so I won't be alone, but you're just going to hear my voice, of course, so bear with us all. And many of you know about the 3 refuges. It's simply Buddhist code, Buddhist ritual, Buddhist habit, a habitual way of remembering what the heck we're up to with our Buddhist practice. So the 3 things we take refuge in, Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, and they're called the 3 jewels. And of course, on a surface level, people, especially more devotional types, they may think of the Buddha as a symbol of what the Buddha actually points to, which is this quality of being awake, being open, being clear, being undefended. I even sometimes like being exposed, just to evoke a kind of fearless presence. So we take refuge in that capacity to be awake, to be open, to see clearly, to feel deeply, to be intimate. With what? And that's the second refuge, with Dhamma, with the way it is, with conditions as they are, with the nature of things just as they are, especially in this study of mindfulness of mind. One of the key points is subtle is significant. And so the mind is relatively subtle. The sensation of the body sitting, the sensations of breathing in and breathing out is relatively gross. The mind, the knowing mind, is relatively subtle. So we're being awake to the way it is, to Dhamma. And we take refuge where we need Dhamma. Dhamma teaches us something, being intimate with Dhamma the way it is. That in a way, the more we're aware of the conditions of the moment as they actually are, the more we get to know the mind. In a way, we need Dhamma to know the mind, because the mind is so subtle, but the objects that the mind knows, that's Dhamma, right? It reflects the mind. And this is what we'll talk more about over the next 6 weeks. And then the third refuge is Sangha. And it gets loosely or maybe superficially translated as spiritual community, but Sangha is really enlightened activity. So when we're living in this way that's really intimate, Buddha, being intimate with Dhamma the way it is, then what we say, what we do, what we don't say, how we are, is really creative and nimble and free and really beautiful. But not because there's somebody trying to be beautiful or wise or kind. Sangha is just the natural expression or manifestation of Buddha knowing Dhamma. It's the active expression of Buddha being intimate with Dhamma. And it's something to take refuge in, whether we recognize it in ourselves in a moment or in another person in a moment. That sort of nimble, wise, creative, compassionate activity. So let's sing this slowly together. You can just follow along with me. You'll hear the word dutiyampi, that just means for the second time. And then you'll hear the word tatyampi for the last 3 times, and that just means for the third time. So we chant, taking refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha 3 times. It's very simple. So if it's new to you, just listen maybe tonight or just follow along as best you can. And as I mentioned in the link I put in the chat, it's right at the bottom of that document in case you want the words in front of you. So you can use this gesture if you like it. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. So we'll settle into some meditation time now. Just do the best you can, cultivating a stable posture that you'll be able to hold relatively still, relatively upright in a way that supports alertness, relatively relaxed, that supports ease in the body. And you can take a couple of longer, deeper breaths if you like. But we'll take a little time making peace with the body just as it is. Not the idea, the body, but this immediate ocean of sensation that's churning and moving right here, right now. Might it be safe to open, to receive, and allow all these different sensations to be the way they are, to be exposed to the activity of the body? Is it safe enough to relax with interest, with this continuity of awareness? And in a way, it's a blessing, a healing blessing for the body, this willingness to be open or exposed to the river of sensation that's here now, flowing on and on. Giving permission to this river of sensation, letting it be the way it is, even if it's unpleasant or even intensely unpleasant. This is how it is right now. And is there a way to be fully immersed or fully open to this river of bodily sensation without being pushed around, without losing balance? And this settledness, this calm, kind presence. So in that way, we don't have to defend ourselves against the sensations. In a sense, we just let them go right through us, right through the sensitive heart. And this is also true with the feeling tone of this body, the bodily activity and mental activity. In fact, every experience has a particular feeling tone. Don't try to sort of connect with the feeling tone directly, but it's just another moving river, more subtle than bodily sensation. This mental river of feeling feels like this: pleasantness, unpleasantness, neutrality. Often we recognize feeling tone because of the liking or the not liking or the ignoring that's there. Liking what's pleasant, not liking what's unpleasant, and ignoring what's neutral. But keep it really simple. We're just sitting in the middle of these rivers, the river of sensation, the river of feeling tone, and also the river of mental activity. So the particular theme for this sit, for the next 15 minutes or so, sitting here in the middle of this moment, each moment, noticing these three related rivers: the movement of bodily sensation, the movement of feeling tone, and the movement of mental activity. And these three rivers can be known. And then there will be times the mind will be lost in thought. So let's make this the theme of our sit, just to study, to recognize when the mind is, relatively speaking, not distracted, which means it's aware of the activity of the body, the activity of feeling tone, the activity of thinking mind. Is just something being known. And there will be other times where this won't be recognized. The mind will be lost in thought. Some reactive pattern, some fantasy, or whatever. So if you notice that there's some distraction, obviously it won't be full distraction, or you wouldn't even notice that the mind is distracted. You could just get interested in the particular of the distraction. Is it greed in the mind? Is it aversion? Is it delusion? Is the mind sleepy or heavy? Is the mind restless? And in those moments where the mind seems mostly not distracted, then notice that experience of non-distraction. Get interested in it. Does it have the taste of freedom or ease? Does it feel good in that inner sense? So like I said, we're going to sit now 15 minutes in silence, simply contemplating the distractedness or non-distractedness of the mind, and just see what you can learn. Remember to be just as appreciative of noticing distractedness as you are noticing non-distractedness, because the point is to learn. keeping the mind in mind. So let this be a dispassionate awareness of the mind. We're not judging. We're just interested in whether the mind is distracted or not distracted. That's all. And just doing our best to have a continuity of interest moment by moment, using the mind to observe the mind. And for the last couple minutes, let's make an effort to get a real sense, a real taste of what non-distraction feels and looks like in the mind. What is the experience of non-distraction? And does non-distraction require that the body or mind be tight in any way? And it's important that we understand that non-distraction doesn't mean that the mind is focusing on something. Take a moment and stretch the body out as you need to so you're comfortable. So we have these 6 weeks to contemplate, and in particular to use the Buddha's teachings to help us contemplate the quality of the mind. Distracted mind, not distracted mind, aversive mind, a non-averse mind, greedy mind, lustful mind, or a not so greedy mind, a deluded mind, not so deluded mind, a restless, scattered mind, or not, a heavy, constricted, dull, sleepy mind, or not. And presuming that there are moments the mind is not distracted, then the nature of that non-distraction, how unified is the mind? Unified in the present moment, unified in a way that includes an awareness of the knowing itself, not wavering in that unification, that being stable, no wavering, no coming and going, but that stability, that wholeness of mind without wavering, and liberated mind, right? Which just points to the mind free of selfing in that moment or in those moments. And I'll go through this more carefully using the Buddha's teachings on this discourse he gave on mindfulness of the mind. Just before I came over to the center this evening, I stumbled upon an old quote I had written down on a post-it by Hannah More. I think she's like an 18th century British sort of religious thinker, writer. And she wrote, the ingenuity of self-deception is inexhaustible. That's a great line. The ingenuity of self-deception is inexhaustible. And this should, I think, inspire in us a lot of humility and awe and respect. Just like, oh yeah, this, what we're doing here, this 6-week course, this is a worthy endeavor. As best we can, as challenging as it is, frustrating, even humiliating, it's really good to get to know the mind. And it's amazing, that we haven't really given it a lot of attention. That's really one of those astounding things. What is the nature of the mind right now? Not philosophically or theoretically, but this mind here and now. What does that word even mean, mind? And some of you know chitta, the Pali word, can get translated either heart or mind. And in a way that, the simple answer to what is mind, this is mind. Because, I may be looking at my computer, or I may be imagining there are people out there, or I may be, feeling the cool air of the air conditioner that's just cycled on here in the building. But all this is being known in the mind. This experience of being a human being is always an experience of mind. And the fact that that seems provocative, what I just said, is just evidence that we haven't really paid attention. It's always a mind experience. Even when you're enjoying the woods, I'm going to go up to Ely, Minnesota tomorrow morning. It's been a few days with Wynn, who's up at an artist retreat. And but it's all going to be a mind experience. The drive up, dangling my feet into the cool lake, maybe jumping in, feeling the sun on my body, seeing animals or whatever happens up there. That's going to be an experience being known by the mind. And here's the kicker, being known in the mind. I'm not saying that there aren't sights that we see or sounds that we hear, but all we know is the experience of mind. Our whole life is knowing the experience of the mind. There's always knowing and something being known. And the something that's being known is something in the so-called mind, not somewhere else. One of our early teachers here in Minnesota, the Twin Cities Vipassana Collective, started, I think, in 1987, when and I moved to Minnesota in 1991. And Common Ground got started in 1993. So there was an insight meditation community here in the Twin Cities before Common Ground. And one of their early teachers was Shinzen Young, a wonderful teacher. I think he now lives in Vermont, but he has quite an active online presence. And but one of the things he used to say in the early 90s is, subtle is significant. And this is really helpful, because a lot of times, we use objects of meditation that are relatively obvious, like a loving kindness phrase or being with the body. And it's really good that embodied presence is a really useful skill. But all of these sort of more concrete things that we pay attention to help ground and show up in the present moment are really in the service of getting to know the heart and mind. And there's a story from Islam, the Sufi tradition, and there was a kind of a wise and somewhat wild, funny character, not clear whether the person was actually a real person or not, but sort of lived on in mythology or legends. And the person's name was Nasruddin. And one of the stories associated with this character is he's out searching under one of those gas lamps, or maybe an oil lamp back in the early, many centuries ago, looking for a jewel that he had lost. And he's searching and searching. Eventually the neighbors notice him out there under the light post searching, and they come out and they start looking, and after a few more minutes, one of the neighbors says, "So where exactly did you lose this jewel?" And he pointed off into a field, far away from the light. And they sort of looked at him in disbelief, like, "Well, why are we looking here if you lost it over there?" He said, "Well, there's really good light here." And this is a little bit like avoiding using the mind to study the mind. It's a little uncomfortable because it's subtle, the mind. Maybe you even had that sense during the meditation or your own reflections this evening as I've been talking, that it almost feels a little weird or self-conscious to be in the right direction, something to respect, something to have some humility around, something to have just a heightened sense like, oh, there's something to learn here. I remember a story that Ajahn Sumedho used to tell, one of our elders in the Theravada early Buddhist tradition here in the West. He's an American Buddhist monk, but who was the abbot of the monasteries in England for many decades, and now no longer the abbot in official capacity at Amaravati anymore. But one of the things Ajahn Sumedho would say about his early years, I think before he had become fluent in Thai, for his early years as a monk, he was in Thailand, practicing under Ajahn Chah and some of the other elders in the Thai forest tradition. And I forget who it was that he met, but there was a well-known, very respected elder, Thai forest monk. And Ajahn Sumedho's Thai wasn't very good, but there was just that opportunity to interact with this wise elder monk. And it was something like he just pointed to his heart, and they communicated just enough that Ajahn Sumedho got the point. It's all here. It's all about the heart. It's all about the mind. And the thing is, it can seem intimidating because our mind is sort of corrupted. We immediately go to philosophical ideas when we think, okay, I got to get to know the mind. But like I was pointing to a few minutes ago, this is always mind. The mind is what's here now. And if you notice that you start scrambling, like, what do you mean here and now? That's the mind too, right? So whatever the response, whatever the reaction might be, whatever the discomfort might be, that's all here and now in the mind. One more story that comes out of our tradition. This is from Bhante Gunaratana. There's a good book that he wrote about the eightfold, I think it's called 8 Mindful Steps to Happiness. It's Bhante Gunaratana's book on the Eightfold Path. He's a long time teacher here in the West, but he's originally from Sri Lanka. I think he ordained as a boy. He was either in his teens or even younger. So he's been a monk for a long time. Now he's got to be close to 90, if not even a little bit above that. And but he tells a story about, if some divine being wanted to hide the secret to happiness, where would they hide it? They'd hide it in the place that no one would look, which is the heart or mind. Because there's a kind of like ignorance, delusion shows up. Like one of the expressions of delusion is thinking that we already know. And one of the things we think we already know is like, I know what's here. And what's here is not the secret to happiness. So the secret to happiness has to be out there, and there's a kind of arrogant certainty of like, why would I be interested in what's here and now? Because what I think is here and now is like me being unhappy or me being unsatisfied. So therefore, satisfaction or happiness has to be somewhere else. So it's a really useful story, and I often, my own version of that story, some of you have heard me say, because I say it a lot, told us all that I hid, $1 million, and I said it's right here in the heart and mind, we'd get very interested pretty quick. But when the Buddha says, or when other wise people tell us that there is a lot to learn and see that's here and now in the heart, and it's liberating. It makes us a wise and kind, nimble, happy human being. And it's here and now. It's always here and now. You just have to get interested. And really, first we find, like when we first start to get interested, we find, I don't really have the proper instrument to be interested. I want to be interested, but I can't. So the first thing we have to do is learn how to stabilize and the present moment awareness, so we can be aware of something relatively subtle, like the mind. Another one of the elders in the Thai forest tradition, and they talk about the chitta, the heart mind, a lot as I guess you could say, the object of awareness. And this teacher, excuse me, would tell his students to watch the mind right at the mind. Right? Those are the kind of teachers, when you get an instruction like that from a teacher, you just want to say, what? Watch the mind right at the mind. And so when people would ask, for give me a little bit more. Well, that's too hard. Give me an easier way. And then he would say something like, don't send the mind outside. In other words, keep the mind right at the mind. Keep the knowing mind right at the mind. So just imagine, this could be something that we share in small groups next Monday, when we have small groups at the end. Like how to get interested in the mind all day long. Still do what we have to do as a human being, as a parent, as a partner, as an employee, as a citizen, somebody who cares, wants to make the world a better place, somebody who has to wash dishes, right? So as a human being, can we function in just that ordinary sense of duties and responsibilities and be interested in the mind all day long? That's an interesting question. Watch the mind right at the mind. Don't send your mind outside. And I remember another teacher saying that, the mind is sort of, when we observe the mind, when we get interested in the mind, it's sort of funny. It's like there's not much there when we look at the mind. But we know there's a mind because it knows things, right? There's a lot of knowing going on, like whatever you're knowing, whatever you're feeling right now. So there are objects being known by the mind. So we know there's a mind because there's this experience being known by the mind. That's what I said a little bit earlier when I was talking about the refuges, Buddha knowing Dhamma. We're so appreciative of Dhamma, even if we're having a rough patch and difficult stuff is happening, because it helps us stay close to the secret to happiness, right? Which is the heart and mind, getting to know the heart and mind. So before we end, I want to sort of put this course, Mindfulness of the Mind, this is the third satipatthana, the third establishment or the third foundation of mindfulness. And I just want to put it in the context of this discourse or this collection of teachings from the Buddha. And here's a really excellent resource for people who want to dig deep. Venerable Analio, this German monk, has written 3 books on the Satipatthana. He keeps learning. His books keep getting better and better. And this is a more practical expression of what he's come to know about these teachings from the Buddha on mindfulness. And it's called Satipatthana Meditation, a Practice Guide by Analayo, by Venerable Analayo, this German monk and one of my teachers. And so you can get a digital version of that, or you can get a paper version. It was published by Wind Horse Publications, I think in England. But here in Minneapolis, Moon Palace Books will order you a copy if you want to pick it up there. And I want to just share a little bit how to hold these teachings on mindfulness of the mind. And I really love the image that Venerable Analayo uses to help us understand the Buddhist teachings on mindfulness. And especially this will be useful for those of you who were here in the winter when we did mindfulness of the body, here in the spring when we did mindfulness of feeling tone. So the way he thinks about this map, that is the Buddhist teachings on the foundations of mindfulness, it's really one of the maps. And remember, there are a lot of maps the Buddha used, and they're overlapping maps. They're overlapping, they're all pointing to the here, this and here and now, or this being known, this experience of mind, a knowing mind, knowing the object or knowing the experience here in the space of the mind that is arising in the space of the mind. And so he uses the image of a wheel, which is a sort of the sacred image that was used in the early years of after the time the Buddha passed away, just a symbol. They didn't really have statues in the early years. That was more arose competing with Greek culture, with Alexander the Great conquering much of that part of the world. And of course, the Greeks had their statues. So then Buddhist culture started to really get into statues as well. But before that, the primary image used to represent the path was a wheel standing with 8 spokes for the Eightfold Path. And so Venerable Analayo uses this, and the hub of the wheel is embodied awareness, because the body, this embodied presence, is something we can begin with easily, something we can come back to. Of course, embodiment is being known where? Here in the heart, right here. When we, right now, all of us, I'm assuming we all have bodies. So let's just be aware. Let's just tune into this embodied awareness right now. Here and now, it's like this. And when we settle in, we realize this inside, outside, mind, body, it's all here and now in the heart, being known. It's okay to call it a body. It's okay to use the image of the body, to know what fingers and how they're different than the toes. But our subjective experience right now of embodiment, what's that? It's sensation being known here in the space of the mind, the space of the heart. So that's the hub of the wheel. And then the 7 spokes of the wheel are these 7 meditation techniques, let's call them, that the Buddha teaches in these teachings on the foundations of mindfulness. And there are 3 related to the body that we did in January and February. And there's the meditation on feeling tone. And then we come to the meditation on the mind that we'll be working with these next 6 weeks. And then in the fall, we'll do meditation on dhammas, which is really looking at cause and effect in the mind. When I pay attention to what, in what way does the mind stabilize and get clear? When I pay attention to what, in what way does the mind get distracted, get disturbed, get shallow or fragmented? Right? So just understanding how the mind comes into balance and how the mind loses balance. So that these 7 spokes really work together. the teachings the Buddha gave on mindfulness of the body, it's not so much him telling us to be aware of the body, but really giving us some reflections that transform how we understand what the body is. So we can really know the body as it is, and not just be stuck in our concept of the body. Same thing with feeling tone. When we are aware of a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling or even a neutral feeling, we immediately go to our reactivity. If it's a pleasant feeling, we're immediately almost lost in liking it. And we're no longer aware of that more raw pleasantness of the experience. Same with an unpleasant experience. How long are we simply, in a relaxed, clear way, aware of the unpleasantness before we immediately start to spin with, how can I get away? How can I fix? How can I distract myself from the unpleasantness? And with neutrality, we ignore it because it's neither pleasant or unpleasant. So we learn like, oh, I don't have to react to feeling because it's going to change pretty quick anyway. So I could just stay. This is like what we did in the spring. We learned to just stay interested in feeling tone with some continuity. And it's such a liberating thing to realize I don't have to react in each moment dependent on the particular feeling tone that I'm feeling. I can just be aware of it. I can be sensitive to it. I can be exposed to it and vulnerable to it and learn it's actually okay when things are unpleasant to be intimately aware of the unpleasantness. And it's okay when things are pleasant to be intimately aware that it's pleasant. And especially, turns out to be especially relevant with neutral, because a lot of life is neutral. And if we don't know how to be with neutral, we're going to miss a large portion of what it is to be a human being and a lot of opportunities to wake up. When we learn these 7 contemplations on the body, on feeling, tone, mind, and this dhammas that usually is left untranslated, the 4th foundation, which really is about how to shape, develop the mind in the direction of awakening. And it's understanding cause and effect, the conditional nature of the mind. The mind has natural ways to become fragmented and superficial and distracted. And the mind there are also natural organic pathways toward balance and clarity and stability, so that mind that is balanced and stable and clear sees things as they are, sees the causes of suffering and the causes for release, and releases what needs to be released. And insight, awakening happens. And that brings us to the rim of the wheel. So the hub is embodied awareness, what we return to over and over again. And we use these 7 contemplations. And in particular, these 6 weeks, we're mastering, developing some competence with the contemplation on mind and like the shape of the mind, the quality of the mind. And I'll get to that next before we end tonight. And that leads to the rim, which is dwelling independently without clinging to anything. Freedom, right? And that's a beautiful image for these teachings on the Satipatthana and for really one map of the whole path. As the Buddha says, mindfulness, O practitioners, I declare, is essential in all things everywhere. It is as salt is to curry. I like that kind of earthy image. Mindfulness, O practitioners, I declare, is essential in all things everywhere. It is as salt is to curry. I always like to say that mindfulness is like the universal solvent. There's a line from the Buddhist teachings, a tangle within, a tangle without. Who in the world can untangle the tangle? And it isn't so much who, but what can untangle the tangle? And it's that steady, wise, unflappable mindfulness. Because in that space, that balanced, penetrating, not like I'm trying to get to the bottom penetrating, but being this balanced, stable space, whatever needs to unwind will unwind. Whatever needs dissolving will dissolve. Nothing really holds together with the continuity of mindfulness. And when everything falls apart or implodes, then the mind realizes how to show up to the conditioned world, this what we call our ordinary world of responsibilities and relationships. We have to see, I know it's a provocative term, we have to see the empty nature, or if you don't like the word empty, we just have to see the nature of reality in order to know how to live in reality. But because our attention is mostly superficial and governed by fixed views, we never see things for what they are. We don't have those refuges of Buddha being intimate with Dhamma. So we don't get Sangha, that wise and kind, awakened activity. So let me go right to the third foundation. I'll read the sutta, and this is in that text. So I'll do it one more time here in case people didn't see it. So there's that link you might want to make a copy of. And we'll get up the resources, but it has all the resources from the past course, as well as a few things, including what I'm going to be reading right now, which is just this section of the Buddhist discourse on satipatthana, mindfulness, just the part on mindfulness of the mind. Actually, this first part is from the very beginning, and it goes like this. The Blessed One said this: "This is the direct path for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for the attainment of the right method, and for the realization of unbinding, nibbana." In other words, the four foundations of mindfulness. Now here's the part on mindfulness of the mind. And how does a practitioner remain focused on the mind in and of itself? There is the case where a practitioner, when the mind has lust, discerns the mind has lust. There's no judgment there. It's just like a mirror. When the mind has greed, the mirror reflects, oh yeah, there's greed now. It's like this. When the mind has aversion, she discerns the mind has aversion. When the mind is without aversion, she discerns that the mind is without aversion. When the mind has delusion, one discerns the mind has delusion. When the mind is without delusion, one discerns that the mind is without delusion. When the mind is constricted or heavy or sleepy, one discerns that the mind is constricted. When the mind is scattered or restless, one discerns that the mind is scattered. Right? Clear, without judgment. And it's really just, this is something we can do all week long, both in our formal sits and throughout the day. How's the mind doing? That's really the takeaway, just getting curious. So curious enough that whether you ask the question with words in your mind, or you're just interested without words, but to be interested, well, how is the mind doing right now? Is there aversion or not? Is there greed operating in the mind or not? Like leaning forward, wanting something to happen or not? Is the mind clear or deluded? Like when I think I know, when the heart is under the influence of a fixed view, well, that's called delusion. Because no matter how we conceive it, it's never that way. That's what the Buddha said. So fixed views, of course, always come in the form of concept, an idea that the mind grips, is attached to. But no matter how sublime the idea is isn't the way it is. The way that it is this experience right now, right? It's not like we need a different moment to get to the truth of things. We just need to meet this moment with clarity, with not a filter based on our conditioning, which is not clear. The conditioning is really arises from self-view. So that's the first section. And then the Buddha goes on. Now he's really talking more about a mind that's not distracted, present. And then the question for that then becomes like, well, how settled is that not distracted mind? Right? So he asks, when the mind is enlarged, one discerns that the mind is enlarged. When the mind is not enlarged, one discerns that the mind is not enlarged. That's a funny word, enlarged. Different people translate that word differently, but the way I understand that, like the mind enlarged is like unified around what's being known in that moment. So there's the experience, like maybe the experience of the body sitting, and there's a non-distracted, and you'll feel that, like when you have an awareness of the present moment object that's not disturbed and not superficial, there's a wholeness to that, a unification to that. That's the mind enlarged. And then he goes on, when the mind is surpassed, one discerns that the mind is surpassed. When the mind is unsurpassed, one discerns that the mind is unsurpassed. Now, the way I understand this unsurpassed is, and we'll be working with this during these 6 weeks, so I'm just sort of going through the teachings from this particular part of the Buddha's teachings on mindfulness just for the first time for us. So how I understand unsurpassed is, not only am I present with the body, let's say, but the mind is also, or you could say wisdom, is also aware that it's being known. So, because in every moment, there are two things. There's the object, like the body sitting, the sensations of the body sitting, and that it's known. And together, the body sitting, the sensations of the body sitting being known, together that's the present moment. That's reality. So enlarged means I'm really aware of the body, but I'm not so aware that it's being known, right? I'm just seeing the object. And then the unsurpassed means I'm aware of the object and I'm aware that the object is being known. So now see that it's unsurpassed because now everything in the present moment is included in the awareness. Then there's a third. So you can see that the Buddha is just describing the profundity of the non-distraction. How stable is your non-distractedness? Enlarged, unsurpassed, and the next word is concentrated or not. Concentrated meaning that you have this unsurpassed awareness of the object and that it's being known with no wavering, right? So there's a stillness, a stability in that knowing. It's not kind of coming and going. There's continuity. That's what we mean by concentration there. And then last one is released or not released, or liberated or not liberated. That means that unwavering present moment awareness of the object being known is so stable, so full, so unshakable that there's no selfing, no craving, nobody being neurotic. It's all kind of self-centeredness, let's say, has been squeezed out. It's suppressed because the continuity and the fullness of the presence is so strong that there's moments, or at least a moment, where craving or selfing is not there anywhere, even in subtle manifestations in the mind. So the mind is in that moment released from the grip of craving, released from the net of delusion. It's free. The mind is free. And so that person experiences the taste of freedom. Oh, this must be what the Buddha is pointing to with his teachings. This capacity, this potential to be free. And then he ends, like the Buddha he repeats this passage 13 times in the collection of teachings in the Satipatthana. In this way, one remains focused internally on the mind in and of itself, or externally on the mind in and of itself, or both internally, externally on the mind in and of itself. Or one remains focused on the phenomena of arising with regard to the mind, on the phenomenon of passing away, or both. Or one's mindfulness, there is a mind, is maintained to the extent of knowledge and remembrance, and one remains independent, not clinging to anything in the world. This is how a practitioner remains focused on the mind in and of itself. So, normally when we think of the mind, we think of me, right? But now we're really using awareness to observe the mind as a natural process or as a natural happening. And we don't we don't impose or project that overlay that it's me. We just observe the mind as it is, as a phenomena that's showing up. And that's what allows for the learning. So let me remind us, because next week, as I mentioned, we'll have small groups at the end. And this week, just in very natural ways in your formal sits, but when you're sitting down outside or lying down on the couch, just get interested. And it could start by just wisdom saying in the mind, honey, there's a mind here. There's a heart here. What is it? What is the nature? What is it to have a mind here and now? Turning the awareness to the mind. And then you can use some of these basic questions that come in this discourse, like is there greed in the mind? And if the answer is no, it doesn't seem to be any greed, then get curious about the mind free of greed. And if there is greed, get curious of the mind with greed. Is there aversion or not aversion? Delusion, distractedness or non-distractedness? Sleepy, heavy, constricted or not? Restless, scattered or not? And if the mind seems relatively not distracted, some continuity of present moment awareness, then get interest, like how stable. You don't have to even remember the different categories of that stability. Just get curious, like how steady is that? How complete? Is there anything the stability of awareness is not yet seeing, not yet feeling, not yet including? Because this is what it looks like to be curious about the mind. That's always here and now. And the key is to remember, you don't need a different moment than the moment there is that you're having. That moment would be perfectly fine, because every moment is a moment of mind. There's no such thing as a moment without a mind. So let me just end our time by reading a few passages from the Dhammapada. These are the translations that Gil Fronsdal has in his translation, which is a wonderful collection of these verses, the Dhammapada. And this is from chapter 3 on the mind. And at the very beginning of the chapter, the passages read, "The restless, agitated mind, hard to protect, hard to control, the sage makes straight, as a fletcher, the shaft of an arrow." If you don't know, a fletcher is someone who makes arrows. "Like a fish out of water, thrashes about, trying to escape Mara's command. The mind hard to control, flighty, alighting where it wishes, one does well to tame. The disciplined mind brings happiness." How do we discipline the mind? This is not the Buddha, but me now. How do we discipline the mind? We watch it. An undisciplined mind is an unobserved mind. A trained mind is a mind that is observed without judgment and without control. Just seeing it changes the mind. And now continuing reading. The mind hard to see, subtle, a lighting where it wishes. The sage protects. The watch mind brings happiness. And then I'll skip a little, just read the last passages. Whatever an enemy may do to an enemy, or haters to one another, far worse is the harm from one's own wrongly directed mind. Neither mother nor father nor any other relative can do one as much good as one's own well-directed mind. So that's enough for tonight. Now remember, next week, people are welcome to come to the building. If you live in town, join us. And we'll start at 7:30. But I'll be here by 7. So if you want to come early and sit before the program begins at 7:30 Central Time, feel free to come at 7. And maybe Kevin, if you're available to be the program host that early, that would be great. But and then those of you online, we'll see each other at 7:30. But feel free to sit a little bit before if you have some time. It's nice. The words from the Buddha really sink in better the more settled we are when we meet. So it's been really great to be with everyone, and sorry about the technical problems at the beginning. Hopefully the sound was good through the rest of the evening. And like I mentioned, we are recording both the audio, which goes to dharmaseed.org, and we're recording on live stream. So you might want to bookmark Common Ground's YouTube channel. All of our programs, or at least many of our programs, are recorded on and exist on our YouTube channel for you to listen to at any time. Have a good week of practice. Take a look at some of the resources that you'll find. Don't feel like you have to begin any one place. Just see what article kind of calls your attention, and just use the information to get to know the mind. And I'll see you next Monday evening. Take care, everybody.